I'm Hank Krakowski. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Air Traffic for the FAA. 14 months in the job, so I just passed probation, so I think my job's secure. Like Bill Voss was saying, it's so nice to be here because there are so many friends and acquaintances and colleagues that I've worked with over the past few years to help get this industry to attain the very safety record that Nick talked about this morning. So I think we all know how to get this job done, and let's talk about it in the new context of a new world going forward. First thing I'd like to do is thank SAE for being the sponsors of our break and the refreshments. If we have a round of applause to them, please. Thank you. And one thing I've been asked to do is to remind everybody to please put your cell phones on vibrate or quiet, please, but don't put them away, particularly if you have a BlackBerry, because one of the things that we'll be doing through the course of this session is you'll be able to text message or email questions to us, and there will be an address on each of the screens as we, about every 10 minutes as we go through our session today, and then someone will bring me the questions to ask from there. Now, we will also have at the end of the session the ability with people with roaming microphones to ask questions and answers from the audience as well, and actually try to spur a discussion of some of this new world we want to talk about. What we plan to do is talk for about the first 45 minutes. We have an hour and a half. And then the last 45 minutes we will reserve for discussions with all of you. And we have a very distinguished team here today. So all of the bios of the panel are in the documents that you have, with the exception of our member from India, which just arrived, Mr. B. Singh. Mr. Singh is the Executive Director of Aviation Safety from the Airport Authority of India. He's in charge of all safety for airdromes, airspace, and the SMS program. Mr. Singh, welcome. Next to Mr. Singh is Eric Merckx from Eurocontrol. David Behrens next from IATA. We have Steve Angus from Air Services Australia, and Neil Planzer from Boeing. And as you can see, this is a very ATM or ATC-centric panel because we want to talk about next gen. You know, when you think about modernization and you think about what we have ahead of ourselves, I think the banner above us really speaks to it all. One world, one sky, one mission. And as we modernize this system, we have to do it in a way that is harmonized across the entire globe. And that's a tricky proposition for all of us in the room, how we're going to deal with safety as we modernize the system, and that's what we want to talk about. One of the things that strikes me as I thought about this panel is when I started airline flying, as many of you all did, back in the 1960s and 70s, we went through a similar transition that we're about to embark with air traffic control. We had 3-4 pilots in cockpits with virtually no automation, fairly rudimentary autopilots back in the 70s when I started. We really weren't doing Category 3 auto lands with the airplanes. And over time, we modernized the cockpits, and the role of the pilot changed, and the role and the atmosphere in the cockpit changed, how we managed that cockpit, and how we actually dealt with each other and the system evolved very definitively over time. So now we have these wonderfully computerized cockpits and airplanes working in an air traffic system that needs to catch up. And that's really what we're here to talk about today. We're talking about a gate-to-gate overhaul of the experience using technology and people to help get us there. So with the panel, I'm going to ask each of the panel members that as we work toward increasing capacity and efficiency, and more importantly now with environmental stewardship, what are your perspectives on how we make sure that safety is not only not compromised, but optimized going forward? Neil, can we start with you, please?
Thank you. I appreciate being here. A good question. It's interesting to understand that air traffic control has standards that have been designed and matured over 50 years to create safety, spacing, and a network of safety around the airplane. That will change as we move forward in in interesting ways that I believe will actually improve and increase the safety, reliability, and the standard on which we can measure safety. A lot of people talk about spacing as how do you handle a shorter spacing, less distance? Spacing really is a technology-driven event based on radars that were designed in the 60s and 70s. As next-gen develops aircraft as nodes on the net, and you have to remember the only thing that actually moves between environments of the 200 ANSPs is the airplane. You want that airplane to be the centerpiece of the information exchange. And then you want to take a look at the command and control and use the technology to best define the safest method of separating airplanes from both terrain, which we've moved a lot towards on the airframe, as well as separation from other airplanes. The concept that airplanes have no ability to see each other isn't true anymore from a technology standpoint. You can show how that technology can replace, in some cases, the ground-based command and control with a shared system where appropriate for airborne-based command and control, just like in a visual approach when a pilot takes over separation from the controller. The question is, how do you measure, how do you do the safety case that says maybe you don't use miles, maybe time is better, what is the accuracy? And the tough part of that will not be the technology, but the mix of types of airplanes. So I think the sooner we start to understand the human factors, both from the ground command and control and the airborne aircraft on the node and the pilot's human factors, you can start to design the method that is more accurate in designing the safety requirement. And forget spacing for the moment. The paramount is, can I give a higher degree of safety in all cases or in cases where I manage the environment that these airplanes are in? I think next gen, done correctly, aircraft as nodes on the net, data link, connectivity, whether it's ADS-B in or in addition to a datacom, will allow that aircraft to be a more reliable partner in the safety standards between aircraft around weather and on terrain. And that's for the entire breadth of aircraft from the Cessna 150 to the A380. So I think NextGen's got to start to focus on that parameter, not today's safety, but how do we increase and improve safety? You may be able to do that with reducing it or changing the way you apply it.
Thanks, Neil. Steve Angus from Australia, as we modernize, what's the safety proposition?
Thank you, Hank, and good morning, or I'd say g'day, mate, so I get that straight and right from the start. I'd like to develop a bit of a theory about the human-machine interface, because I think that's one of the key issues around modernising. And through that, systems and technology, people and organisations, and then the operations, the weather, the unpredictable environment in which we work in. My observation is it's very easy to be distracted by the day-to-day operations, become very tactical, and clearly, as we move to new generation, we must become very strategic. And through that, I believe we need to have better planning and integration. We need to understand the relationship between stakeholders in the whole system, and then through that, some of the conversation that's already started this morning about data exchange and information sharing. It is no surprise to anyone that there's a high cost of infrastructure in this environment and industry, and so therefore we must plan together to ensure that we don't make mistakes with the way we invest in technology. We can't afford not to embrace and strengthen every opportunity, and for me, early planning, and I use the words in Australia, design in those things that are good and design out those things systemically that we want to remove from the system. I also believe that improving safety outcomes is not inconsistent with our desire for efficiency and to reduce the impact on emissions. Really, my key message in the first step is around early planning, cost-effective investment, and absolutely working together. Human error, the relationship between people and machine, goes across the whole stakeholder environment. And for me, the daily errors that occur in our system are a reflection of how we must work together at the strategic level. Human factors, which Neil has spoken about, is clearly one of the greatest safety challenges when we are looking towards efficiency and reducing the impact on the environment. It is most important that we are persistent in that relationship between people and systems. It is so complex. Regulators, domestic and international, airlines, general aviation, the whole industry in terms of those that are flying in the cockpits, air service providers, the military, state and federal legislation, airports. It's entirely complex, and I want to leave you with my thoughts about how important it is to build relationships and work together. There are a lot of independent safety systems that operate today. We must bring them to one global environment. So while the priorities might be different and sometimes in conflict, there is one common theme. No one wants a safety incident on their watch. So robust and strong relationships. The last comment I'd like to make in this opening discussion is around technology. To me, in simple terms, the advancement of technology is around data sharing and information. Sure, we have some terrific machines that do work, but ultimately it's about system exchange of information, movement of aircraft, what the weather is doing, demand capacity balancing. All of these are data which we need to manage and which we've already started that conversation. It's a data-rich environment that we work in and illustrates the interdependencies between people and machines. So, it's an opportunity, but it's also a challenge. Data gives us a history of where we've been, and now we are working towards being able to forecast. But I think in terms of the planning process, we need to get to the stage where we predict, and that's a whole of industry approach. Systems, stakeholders, planning and integration are all about exchange and sharing. So I think I'll leave it there with those two things, human-machine interface and the important strategy of bringing people and machines together.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Dave Burns from IATA, International Air Transport Association. You've worked all over the globe, including Asia. Your thoughts, please.
Hank, it's really a big challenge because, yes, there's going to be some paradigm shifts that are required when we start looking at advanced technology, ADS-BN, self-spacing and merging, trajectory-based operations, some of the data link communications we're currently in the comfort zone of voice, et cetera, et cetera. But I think what's very important is that we go back to some basic fundamental principles. And I think Neil said it very well. The common element in all this is the aircraft. It's a global system, and we really need to remember that it is a global system and that, yes, there are national demands and system requirements, but the question needs to be asked, how does that system integrate into a global system where we have a pilot that one day is in Europe, and the next day is in North America, and the day after is in Asia? I think that's very, very important. I think also it's so important that we do not deviate from the international standards. And I'm talking more than just for the pilot. I'm talking about for the controllers, for phraseology, for even the regulatory approval processes and all. The more we standardize, the more we're going to enhance and ensure safety. And the more that we deviate, I'm sorry to say, but the more we're going to punch holes in that Swiss cheese, which we don't like. So I think that's very, very important. And I think there's a commercial phrase that we're all familiar with. It's think global, act local. And that, I think, is really the culture and the mission that we really need to promote and push forward everywhere. I think also that's very important is that we have worked very hard on a safety culture. We've managed to really embrace safety management systems, and we're starting the process of, shall we say, weaving safety into the fabric of the whole air traffic and transportation system. I think that's very important. But I go back to what you initially said, and that is, you know, we got to focus on capacity. We got to focus on efficiency. We got to be environmental stewards. There is a huge pressure on us. The good news is that none of that really contradicts each other. If we build a system that has the capacity, that has the efficiency, it will be environmentally friendly. And oh, by the way, an efficient system is a safe system. So I think something that's very, very important to us is that there's been a lot of focus on safety, and for very, very right reasons, and we've done a stellar job. But if we focus solely on safety, I've seen many times where efficiency suffers, capacity suffers, and obviously the environment suffers. But if we take that more balanced approach of raising the level of efficiency to a similar level of safety, so that it's a safe and efficient system, I think that is something that's very important that we instill culturally in the system.
Excuse me, thank you. Eric Merckx from Eurocontrol, of course, you're on the leading edge of the CESAR program, which is the European equivalent of NextGen. And of course, you're right in the throes of trying to bring the European community together on its safety approach. Please.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation from the FAA. It's a great environment, 400 people, just great. I'd like to perhaps start by saying that safety for the future perhaps is not too different from what we try to do today. If I compare safety with the temple, we've got a number of pillars on which that temple is being built. And if I just count them, I think we're talking about accountability, we're talking about a systematic structure, and we're talking about resources and competencies. In terms of accountability, I think it's important to mention that wherever we go, whether we speak to airlines, whether we speak to air navigation service providers, to regulators, to manufacturers, that safety accountability is not a given, that it is explicit, and that people make sure that safety accountability does exist. And that there is the commitment to do so. Also, not only in terms of lip service, but in practical terms. Invest time in safety, invest money in safety, invest people. And I think this event is a good example. If I would calculate how much it costs for all of us to be here, it's a major investment, but it's definitely worth it. I remember when I joined Eurocontrol, I had on my first day a little chat with the guys who I would be working with. Some of these guys, they write guidance material, thick documents, guidance material, how to do this, how to do that. And I told them, I said, from time to time, I'll come around and I will ask you the simple question, how many lives you think you have saved today by writing this guidance material? Because I think that's the business we're in. We're in the business of saving lives, and in that way, we're not any different from surgeons, from doctors, from fire brigade persons, etc. So accountability is quite important and commitment. Then there is the systematic structure. Everybody talks about safety management systems. I think that many organizations have these days a safety management system in place, and a good one. It's starting to build a robust one. But safety management system alone is not a good way of moving forward. It needs to be balanced with proper regulation. And it really needs to be a balance. I remember an editorial note from Bill Voss in one of his newsletters from the Flight Safety Foundation, who said, I've done a survey, he said, if I count all the regulations that exist, I come with a number of 30,000. Now, that is not workable, of course. That is a bit too much. Over-regulation leads to organizations who do not take the accountability themselves anymore, because they will wait until a new regulation comes up. On the other hand, we need global standards, so a good balance between safety management and safety regulation. Then there is the issue about resources and competencies, which also Bill Voss in his opening speech this morning already talked about. We have in a number of countries, and particularly on the regulator side, not enough resources to provide sufficient oversight, and in a number of cases, we do not have the right competencies. And we all know what the reasons are. Bill has explained it very clearly. So resources and competence also in the future to make NextGen and CESAR work is going to be very important, because all this work will need to be subject to safety oversight. I think the other speakers already spoke quite a bit about interoperability and the global dialogue, so I don't want to dwell on that any further. Lastly, I think is research on safety as well. I mean, we have safety management system, we have methodologies we apply, but we have to do more. There will be days that we will have to come up with new methodologies, include the human factors, the human assurance levels, which already was which people spoke about. So continue to do the work to make sure that we do research on safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Mr. Sang, welcome. Of course, in India, you have quite a bit of transition going on in your country as well. Could you offer your thoughts, please, as we modernize?
Thank you. In the beginning, I would like to say thanks to Chief FAA, Mr. Sturgill, for giving the condolence remarks on what has happened recently in India. It's everybody's concern, whether it is India or any other country. When such things do take place, it's a direct impact on the civil aviation, airport functioning, passengers, tourism, and everything else. So these things are related directly with the social safety, of course. Yes, I'm thankful for all the you people and August gathering that I have got a chance to face those people. Yes, Hank, thank you very much. India is very much concerned and understands and has got a great commitment towards the safety. In the last 4 or 5 years, the boom in the aviation, the number of aircraft movements, the passengers, tourism, has taken enormous growth in double figures, about 23% aircraft movements and 23% of passenger traffic movements. And the whole world is watching how India could manage such a great boom in the traffic. The system of airports and air traffic management and everything else was designed not for this type of growth, but of late, of the experiences, Airports Authority of India and DGCA India, the government of India, has taken up a challenge into the hands. A government committee was established by the government in 2005. It has interacted with all big brothers like FAA, ICAO, regional offices, all the stakeholders, IATA, and in-house with all the stakeholders to do. It should be the online, current, day-to-day affair. We tried to expand infrastructure as much as possible. In Delhi, we made 2 runway operations, all the procedures, the concepts, designs, rapid exit taxiways. Within 1 year we created, and we were able to increase the runway handling capacity along with the apron capacity also, and that could meet our demand challenge of the national capital. The next big hub in Mumbai is there. Of course, the land availability and infrastructure expansion, because Bombay is a small island. The land occupied around the airport makes very, very difficult to increase the infrastructure on ground, taxiways and runway, parallel runways. We are using the cross runway. But modifying the procedures, enhancing the safety and taking care of everybody, we are using the cross runway operations at Mumbai. This is the biggest destination in India. We could handle it. On the whole, all the major airports and others, including the air traffic management, we have implemented Bobcat operations in that region with the help of Aerothai and ICAO regional office to minimize the overflying delays, having difficulty to cross over to Pakistan and Afghanistan. Despite routes remaining same, the efficiency has been increased, not compromising with the safety that has been done. On ground, the congestion led to delays and so many other things, extra burn fuel, etc. The government took a challenge, and this committee gave recommendations to increase the infrastructure for air traffic services and the airports as well, along with the stakeholders. Again, this master plan based upon this committee's recommendations has been planned there. In the master plan, the expert committee gave so many recommendations, measures to cope up with current demand and future growth, integrating met facilities, then committee interact with all the stakeholders and master plan, which we call as Future Indian Air Navigation Systems Master Plan has been developed. In the communication, on the next gen as you're talking, in the communication, India has planned from shifting from voice-based to data-based systems. Voice will not be phased out, it will be kept as a backup to the systems for whenever needed or in case of emergencies also. In the navigation, we are slowly switching on to the space-based navigation system. The ground-based facilities will be slowly phased out. In the surveillance, a big network over the Indian airspace on the land, a radar network is there. The remaining areas, remote areas where it is not possible, we are trying to increase the radar sites, and remote areas where it is not possible to have the radars, the ADS, B type of facilities the expert committee has planned, and we are very much on the job. This all will enhance the safety in that region. As on today on the master plan when we are working, lot of work has already been initiated. It is somewhere on the thresholds or little more progress has been done. We are using the CPDLC in the Bay of Bengal. Flights coming from Hong Kong, Singapore, Thailand, others. They are crossing the Bay of Bengal, and ADS-C workstation is active in Calcutta, and it is providing very good service. Similarly, ADS-C workstation working at Mumbai over Indian Ocean and Arabian Sea near the Gulf countries. It is providing good surveillance to the overflying traffic. We have other plans also like DSCN, then data link ATIS, networking throughout India, all ATIS resources, and wherever you are at one station you can download the information, including the meta information on this network. We all have that. Then inter-ATS facility, data link facilities. Recently we have implemented performance-based navigation with the help of MITRE Corporation, USA. They must be here somewhere. We are thankful for the support. We have implemented performance-based navigation in India at Delhi, Mumbai, and one another major station, Ahmedabad. The fleet from the airlines is not fully ready, but however, at sample basis, random basis, as experimental and education and practice of the controllers, this is being done. Results shortly may be available, not in the immediate future, but we have already implemented. I think if I'm not overrunning the time, you have still time. Lot of still more works are there. We fully are there with the world. As you are saying, one world, one sky, and one mission, safety. India is having the master plan in hand. Lot of work is there. I think at other places we will be able to share. It's our mission to share the worldwide with all the stakeholders, community, the information we are having, and we are on the job for safety management system also. Thank you.
Bakshish, thank you very, very much. You know, I once thought that we here in the United States had some of the most complicated airports until I had the privilege of visiting Sydney recently, and I saw an airport with a lot of runway crossings, environmental hotspots of noise and pollution around the area, a lot of political issues that you have to deal with. And from the Australian point of view, Steve, how does technology merge with increasing demands at airports to create more capacity in an environment like that that's very complicated, yet keeping it safe as well?
That's a big challenge, isn't it? And Sydney in Australia reflects a typical highly complex operation that you might find in countries all around the world. I'd still continue with the thought that if you get safety right, immediately the efficiencies and the environmental gains that you'll get out of that will respond in due course. And probably one of the most current practical examples of that is required nav. And stable in the environment where we provide services, the safer it will be. One of the key challenges, I think, with any complex airport operation is that shared understanding of the responsibilities and the accountabilities of all the stakeholders. I'll just spend a couple of minutes working through how complicated that actually can be, and I think it will be the same no matter where you are in the world. The airport owner has an interesting challenge between commercial objectives and the requirement to provide safety. Their role is critically important in the overall way that we embrace change, technology advancement, efficiency, and underpinning that safety. I represent the service provider in Australia, and clearly with an airport like Sydney, it is critically important we understand our role to lead technology change, to improve services, and particularly I'll go back to a key theme around predictability. The regulator's role is a critical one in being responsive. We talked about prescription and thick manuals. I think that's the challenge for any regulator. And the more that the regulations around any airport are outcome-based, it will immediately flow into safety outcomes and from that service improvements and efficiency. Clearly, we've talked a lot about the airlines. They are the centrepiece of any system to do with ATM, and their role must be clearly understood by the pilot in terms of how they manage their approaches and departures into an airport like Sydney. Stability in approach, predictability in departure is a critical ingredient. One thing that I'll introduce when we start to talk about airports is the community. Community has very mixed expectations, and it's a challenge for those that are deeply immersed in the industry to understand the balance between those that live around an airport who want to enjoy life, enjoy their street, their families, and have this challenge of noise and emissions. And then the community has got to appreciate the airport is a nerve centre. We've had a lot of discussion already this morning about how aviation drives an economy. And so community has an interesting challenge at a local level and then at what I call more of an international and national responsibility. And finally, government policy. It's been talked about a little bit this morning, but clearly it is a driver. And the way we legislate for how airports should operate is clearly an enormous challenge when you actually get down to the fundamentals of how an airport operates. It's a delicate balance, and I'll go back to this concept of commercial objectives of an airport and the overall objective that safety should always be the enduring and primary consideration. And so I leave this thought around how important it is to have some formality and transparency in process, and so I touch on safety management systems. Air Services has a safety management system. Our airlines are working towards a similar concept, as are airports. But at the moment, they're somewhat like centrepieces of each part of the industry component and are not necessarily particularly integrated. And if we can bring that kind of cornerstone concept of safety management systems into how we manage change, my belief is that it will bring a joint approach to the way we identify hazards and risks. It'll bring joint understanding and accountability about how we mitigate those risks. And it provides a very consistent and transparent methodology for how we manage. So safety management systems might be seen as being very bureaucratic, but in fact they drive the whole culture, the just culture of how we manage a complexity around an airport. So I think there are lots of things we could talk about here. But for me, it is the relationships between a lot of very complicated stakeholders and their different objectives, and it is how we can use the safety management system as a pillar or a cornerstone for how we manage that. Hank?
Dave Behrens, you and Neil talked about the aircraft as being really a key component, the kind of unique component in the system as it flies around. Now, your experience is in the Asia-Pacific area, and we've watched countries really leapfrog technology to become really leading-edge modern air traffic systems like in the Middle East. So as these systems are moving toward different levels of maturity, how do we keep this all glued together and keep it safe?
It's a very interesting process. Let me just take Asia Pacific, for example. You're dealing with a whole multiple of cultures, a whole multiple of levels of expertise, a whole multiple level of understanding the English language. It is a meeting that is conducted in an international arena, an ICAO process, which is quite necessary. Conversing in English, which just about nobody speaks as their mother tongue, with very small representation from states, so you don't have the full, shall we say, platform of expertise representing each state. What you have is a token representation of somebody that they're trying to understand the whole system and the questions that come back. So having said all that, I think there's some very important factors and lessons learned, at least from my experience there. One is due process. I'm a firm believer that success is measured in these type of arenas, in particular, I'd say anywhere, is measured in a due process where we capture all the stakeholders, we capture all that needs to be done into a standardized task list so that everybody knows what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, it needs to be agreed timelines, et cetera, et cetera. This then will ensure that everybody understands the concept, because that's one thing that we have found out is that not necessarily nodding ahead means I understand, but when we go through the structured process, people begin to really understand what the change is all about. Everybody will understand the issues. Everybody will understand what needs to be done in terms of aircraft equipage, in terms of pilot training, controller training, AIS, regulatory process. One of the biggest showstoppers we've seen time and time again is the operational approval process. And so, I mean, those type of areas under that structured list, everything is being addressed. We do the safety case together, especially when there's reduction of separation minimums. Everybody understands the risks and the safety case. And also, I think very, very important is everybody under this type of a process understands the cost and the benefit. And for representing the airlines, that's almost everything, because what is being asked is an investment. And if we don't understand what the predictable benefits are, then maybe we're going the wrong direction. So I think that's important, the due process. Involving all the stakeholders. I think that is so vitally important. And it is a challenge in Asia Pacific, Middle East, and areas, especially if a lot of the solutions are contract solutions. Because sometimes a state won't have that expertise. They'll hire a contract, they'll go in, and they'll put something that is textbook correct, but without consultation of the pilots or the airlines or the controllers. I've seen things being implemented that nobody likes. And so getting all the stakeholders involved, I think, is so very, very important. Stick to a single game plan. I think that's important as well. Once again, the mission statement, aviation is a global system. If we want a system that is safe as possible, I'll say it again, we stick to the international standards. And any time we deviate from the standards, once again, we're punching holes in that cheese. I think another important thing is make a go, no-go decision, especially when you're dealing with multiple states. And I mean, you'd be surprised how multiple it can be. I mean, you take something like Bay of Bengal. There's like 6 or 7 ATS providers just in that little body of water. So it's very important that we stick with this structured system, that we make a go, no-go decision, at least 3, 4 ARIC cycles, review the whole process. Is everybody that's on board? Is everybody equipped? Is everybody ready? Okay, let's go or no go. Make that decision. Also, let's talk about ARIC cycles. Please, please. I mean, the lessons that we've learned time and time and time again is we have to implement on ARIC cycle dates. We have been surprised more than once about sometimes major changes, instrument procedures or routes that are not voluntary but mandatory. And oh, by the way, we're not given the correct 28 days or 56 days advance notice. In fact, sometimes the corners are cut so short that not a single pilot has a chart, not a single FMS database has the information in, and that is just asking for problems. So we have to follow that ARIC cycle, that Annex 15 due process. And the problem is usually not that the professionals are not following the due process. Normally it's because there's a political intervention. And a politician will make some decision like on this date, since this is a special date, we'll implement, and it's a surprise. Well, guess what? You know, I mean, that surprise sometimes adds risk to the system. If they understand what they're doing, I think they would think twice on this. So ERIC cycles are so important. And I think also that's in the context of Annex 15 and ERIC cycles and all that is the data integrity. This is now a data-driven air traffic system, and it's so vitally important that we get the data right. And if we rush the system, if we don't follow the due process, it's amazing, Hank, sometimes how things have been meticulously gone over and they get wrapped up and sent off to the charting company or data supplier, and then they find out that there's errors. And we need, I mean, that's the reason why we build in that time, is so that we do that double checking and get the errors all checked and then come out with a solid product. The other thing I think is an important lesson that we have learned is involve all the stakeholders, especially on the front line. I mean, you know, you have controllers, you got pilots, you got airlines. Controllers and pilots, they talk to each other every day, but we don't always talk to each other or with each other. And what we have found out is that if there's a problem, lots of times all it takes is a simple mission to wherever the area of concern is. We get all the people players on the table, the controllers, the regulatory authorities, the airlines, the pilots, and then we sit down, and it's amazing how often what was a problem, when we get all the people together, the solutions just come up automatically. And we walk away time and time again like, why didn't we do this before? So that's so important. And then I think last but not least, one important lesson we've learned is that we've excelled in the en route, but lots of times we don't really put that same type of effort into the arrival-departure part of the scenario. In the international flora, we're looking at the en route structure. We're not necessarily looking at the airports and what goes in and out there. And I think there's a lot of more attention that we need to play there.
Okay, very good. Thank you, David. I'm going to move into some questions just in general that anyone can ask, but I'll actually start with Eric here on this first one. Under the next-gen CESAR modernization proposition, by virtue of the technology, more aircraft will be flying closer together than they currently do now, which then presents the postulate that pilot error, controller error, blunders, a quick deviation for weather or an emergency on an aircraft where the aircraft goes off altitude or off course, there's less tolerance for that. So how do we prepare the people, controllers, pilots, people operating the system for this new world?
Thank you, Hank. I think I could see two approaches from an air traffic management point of view. One is what I would call a downstream approach, and that is that I'm certain that in the new system we can do far better planning than we can do today. We have in Europe a central flow management unit that actually has a complete overview of all the flights. It discusses slots, delays, and everything. I think with the new system we will be even more advanced than we are today. So a lot of the errors that could occur, I think we can take out of the system in the planning phase. A good example, for example, is not necessarily what we do in CESAR, but it's something very similar to that. We have when you look at incidents that occur, within aviation, very often callsign confusion is a cause. Callsign confusion whereby either the pilot or the air traffic controller actually hears something different, as a result of which not the right aircraft, but another aircraft may actually follow up the instructions. And these situations can be quite dangerous. Now, I know that certain airlines within their own airline system try to deconflict these call signs, make sure that they're not too much alike within their own airline system. Now, that's fine, but it doesn't solve the problem at the global approach. Well, we're currently working on a system whereby call sign confusion, or the call sign similarities at least, can be conflicted in a central way very early in the planning phase, whereby probably 70 or 80% of the incidents that would occur based on callsign confusion would be avoided. And I think that's a good example of how we will be able to play more with the system in the future by deconflicting in the planning phase. Now, there's also, I think, upstream something to be done. And that is for the air traffic controllers, at least, to have better tools to plan their work. Currently, the philosophy, the concept of operation for an air traffic controller is he controls the system, but he hasn't got really information with very long notice. That will change. Controllers will have tools such as medium-term conflict detection. They will be able to get the information from incoming flights, let's say from 200 miles away, so they can coordinate better all the system. And I think by doing so, that probably will reduce the risk of making mistakes. So for me, the answer is in planning, either in a central management planning phase or with the tools which we get for air traffic controllers.
Anyone else?
Sure, I have some thoughts on that. Safety isn't a measurement of spacing. And I know we mentioned that the role of air traffic control is to save lives. Actually, it's to prevent the loss of life and injury. Its purpose is to keep airplanes from hitting each other. That's what it was designed to do. The spacing, it was designed under a historic belief that airplanes had a limited ability to participate in that. It's a partnership between ground and air. As the technologies are more and more moving to a sophisticated airborne platform, you can start to use that more and more to provide a new layer of safety. Not eliminate necessarily old layers of safety, but when you look at the current modern aircraft, you realize that they are much more capable, and growth has been much more rapid than in air traffic control for lots of reasons. Mostly the computer chip. And the cycle, although long with aircraft, is shorter than it is with air traffic control to refresh the system. So as an example, rather than talk about the processes we have to apply for safety, you want to talk about how do you embed improvements to safety utilizing technology as an aid. It's not the solution. If you look at parallel runways where we have 4,300 feet separating them, just as an example, for simultaneous ILS approaches. That's not a law of Newton. That's changeable. If you have the right technologies on the air and on the ground, you can bring those distances much closer together. When we think of next gen, you want to think about how it can apply to improve safety and capacity simultaneously. If safety isn't improving, and I would argue you shouldn't hold it constant, it's an always evolving improvement. That's why you've gotten to the miraculous safety levels we do. The processes are important, but we are underutilizing the airborne platform as part of the partnership. And until that's brought in, errors on pilot deviations are there. They always have been. You want to have a multi-tiered safety net, both in the airborne and the ground-based systems and in the purely automated systems that are reactive, such as TCAS is a reactive system. Keep in mind that safety is a double-edged sword in this respect. Safety is the driver of consequence in everything we do. It is also the bastion in which people who don't want change hide in order to prevent change from happening. So you often hear people argue it would be unsafe to do that. The tough job in next gen really isn't in air traffic control, in my belief. It's actually in flight standards. It's in the regulatory portion of it, where their regulator has to both understand change, evaluate concepts, and measure the improvement to safety that they bring. So I would argue the next gen process isn't about whether or not a pilot is a mile off a center line on an 8-mile wide airway, or he deviates more than 300 feet. That's going to happen, but how would you prevent aircrafts from conflicting with each other using every available tool, leveraging modern aircraft as the fleet refreshes? And until that is woven into the fabric of air traffic control, you're going to have lots of technologies out there with minimal capacity gains, minimal efficiency gains, and I would argue probably no safety gains. And you want all three of those things to be moving simultaneously, and they should be your metric. Is safety improving? Is runway capacity improving? Is airborne efficiency improving? If safety isn't improving, then you're not doing it right. If the other two are not improving, you can improve safety simply by limiting the number of aircraft in the air in congested airspace. That's not the approach that we've ever taken, nor is it the one that the regulator, at least in this country, has been doing. So I think the tough job, with respect to all my air traffic colleagues, including Hank, really is also a partnership, and the regulators who are responsible and own safety have to start really rolling up their sleeves in helping the air traffic people understand what they are going to require to increase that capacity. Not an easy job, by the way.
Yeah. Steve, you seem to want to get in this one.
Yes, I'd like to offer another perspective on this, and it's really about human factors. My experience with the ATM system is that the actual systems, the technology has high integrity. It generally doesn't fail. We have triple fail-safe systems to make sure that that part of the system is very robust. But the interface is the one that's the challenge. And when we talk about aircraft closer together, all those issues around efficiency, you come back to human factors. And I'd share just one observation as an ex-air traffic controller is that if I sit behind a controller when they're doing the day-to-day work, and I'm sure the same would apply to a pilot in the cockpit, and they automatically do things, they follow procedures, they tick strips, whatever the activity might be, and then you say to them, why did you do that? Quite often the response will be, what did I do? It is so automatic in the way that they operate that in fact the human interface is not even recognised by the controller or the pilot themselves. So it's critically important that we understand that relationship, because then when you go to the controller, well, you did this. Oh, well, I do that 1,000 times a day. And then you say, well, why though? Why do you do it? And then they will bring it together and say, I do it because of safety. I do it so my next colleague knows that the aircraft is coming, etc., etc. That's human factors. And when you get into this high technology, high data rich environment, particularly where we're talking about transfer of information, the role of the human is a critical part of how we will manage as the technology allows us to have aircraft closer together. So whilst you've got the policy overlay, the regulatory overlay, which are all critically important, I don't think we can ignore the importance of understanding human factors and how people interact with the system.
Okay, so let's kick it up from that, because I think that's an interesting point. If you think of next-gen and modernization and aircraft that are data linked, because the voice command piece came up here a couple times, how do we deal with wrong identifications? We're moving to a world of data link, and we're moving to a world where everything that happens in the system will eventually get captured and measured and analyzed. And we have different systems out there. We have safety systems that in some cases may be more punitive, other safety systems that are more toward a just culture. And we have different programs that can point at each other in different ways. One of the concerns about NextGen and Cesar with this data-rich environment is as error occurs in the system, as mechanical failure occurs in the system, how do we get the right kind of safety discussion between airlines and operators and the regulator, the air traffic provider, different countries that may have different philosophies? How do we resolve these very complicated political issues around the technology that's going to be so visible in the data? Anyone?
Well, you don't. I think that we each have different parents, and each will choose the method for managing and disciplining their management of the system differently. The Asians, the Africans, the North Americans, the South Americans, and the Europeans will all do it differently. The question really isn't how do we get the culture to understand the value of the people in it, but you want to understand how the culture will share information for each nation to adjust its methodologies for. The number of incidents decreases as a percentage of aviation, increases as the volume increases, but the percentage decreases. You want discussions on causal factors. There is very little opportunity for us to discuss with the European Union how the Czech Republic is going to handle controller errors, or how an ANSP in Germany is going to respond to that, or an agreement on how the US will. Personally, I believe the way you do that is an open approach that says you get to manage for safety's sake in a non-punitive way. The bottom line of that will be at some point people will have to be determined as capable or not capable of performing their functions. But the reality is, I think if you started to try to have a common approach worldwide on the discussions and how individuals managed by companies and air traffic systems, some of which are corporatized and privatized, it's a diversion. It's just a diversion that'll take you off of the safety case. The safety case isn't the discussion internationally of the event. It is the sharing of your analysis within your country, outside its boundaries, of what the causal factors were, so that people can, within their own system, manage and understand how to change it and prevent it from happening. If our biggest issue is missed call signs, then we don't have much of a problem because we can fix that. We've been fixing that for 50 years. If our biggest issue is how does an aircraft self-separate appropriately when and where over the North Atlantic, that's a viable discussion. And how we will make agreements to do that. Because that's where airlines and the system makes huge headway, is when we start to be able to do those types of things where appropriate. And that's a tough discussion, just like open skies are a tough discussion. But that's where we ought to be focusing on, not the detailed processes. And with all due respect to ICAO, I would argue that you want to have a leadership in change that focuses on, with due respect to all the other nations here, on the two centers of gravity within Europe and the United States that run 80% of the traffic. That doesn't mean you exclude the others from that information, either India or China or Africa or South America. But that North Atlantic is the bridge of connectivity, and to a lesser extent the South Pacific, but that North Atlantic bridge of interoperable connectivity is where the world will watch and manage the change. And if Airbus and Boeing and Embraer and Dassault and Cessna and put together airframes that are capable of operating in the future system as nodes on the net, then the world will understand that, and it'd be very hard for an ANSP in a small nation to argue they want a separate connectivity. It's not the ground that is the connectivity piece. The only thing that moves, folks, is the airplane. If it's not going to be airplane-centric in the future system from connectivity, then we're all lost, because there's 200 plus ANSPs, 200. And each one has its own business plan and its own politics. So we try to raise it, and I would argue that a good common denominator are airlines, because they operate internationally by definition with I understand, domestic routes, but the airplanes operate capabilities domestically. So that's my view of the world.
Bakshish,
Yes.
it looked like you wanted to get in on this one. The data discussion, the data-rich environment with modernization.
I could not understand the question.
The question was the data-rich environment. Everyone will see what's happening in the system. And does that create a dilemma for the safety case as we share safety information and errors?
So I think you pass on the question. Yeah?
Okay.
I could not understand what was.
Okay. Eric, it looks like you have.
I'd like to actually put it under a different angle as well, and that is that if you look at the data that are available, some of the data are visible, some of the data are not. Some of the data, perhaps in the future, are automatically available. But still, there will be a question on how we're going to use these data. And we still have a problem, I think, worldwide with the fact that data are not protected and that people can be prosecuted. Yeah. And I think that the only way forward is to try to go for regional and preferably global solutions. In Europe, I think there is now a way forward in the fact that there is some European directive that actually is already from 1994 that was asking states to put an accident investigation body in place who would look at the accidents. That directive from 1994 did not mention at all just culture. Well, actually, the European Commission is now reviewing it, and they've been asking at Eurocontrol to look at how we can incorporate just culture into European community law. Now, I think that's a major step forward. The other thing is that in terms of criminalization, there might be a way forward in trying to look a bit beyond our own little aviation circle. It's all right for us, airlines, service providers, regulators, to say we need to try to empower people to report incidents, to use the data properly for learning. However, if there is a system in place that punishes people for the wrong reasons, then we're not going to get any way forward. And we try with Eurocontrol to get a dialogue started, and I think good progress with national prosecutors to try to make them understand that it is in their benefit as well that actually data are protected as long as there are there is no gross negligence or there are no mistakes being made which are criminal offenses. So we're working on that, and I think if you then take it one step further, perhaps we also need to make sure that not only the prosecutors are being made aware of what needs to be done, and perhaps to help together with them to change the legislation, but also the media. I think the media also have a major responsibility in ensuring that we are a safe sector. Aviation is safe, and the incidents which we do have, we use them to make it safer. I mean, that's the message which I think we need to pass on to the media as well.
Okay, we have questions coming in now from the audience, so I'd like to get to some of those. And anyone is free to take a stab at this. First question, a number of panelists talked about an efficient system being a safe system and that global standardization leads to a safer system, yet we continue to see the proliferation of country-unique regulations and efforts. What is being done to ensure that NextGen and CESAR efforts are consistent, coordinated, and not duplicative?
I'll start if you like.
Go ahead, Steve.
I'm fairly new to the safety role, and it's been an interesting experience to come across to some of the international forums. And one of those that I had the pleasure to join was the local ICAO DGCA meeting in Asia. Wow. And I can't help but think that when we are trying to remove uniqueness in a global sense, ICAO has such a strong leadership role to play. And I'm not sure what your experiences are of that, but I think it is a challenge when you bring a lot of delegates together, that the need to move beyond encouraging and taking note and actually working towards making decisions that drive change, that drive efficiency and bring global standardisation is an enormous challenge, but it's one that I think ICAO should consider perhaps in that perspective. So I've got involved with CANSO. CANSO is a tremendous service provider forum for bringing global standardisation, but it can't do it alone. So when you start to talk about representative bodies, you've now got CANSO, you're talking about ICAO, you're talking about IATA, the list goes on. And bringing those respective professional bodies together is a critical part of how you overcome this uniqueness that creeps into the system.
Anyone else?
Well, I'd separate, you have to separate sovereign approaches to management of systems from an international safety standard. ICAO is laying a level of safety that is the base level for the world, it's 167 members, on what is the agreed upon base level of safety. In most cases, volume of traffic makes it impossible for larger countries to accept the base level as the standard. So you do not want to actually, in many cases, bring down the ability of countries to manage large volumes of traffic. So they will look for sovereign issues to deal with it. You don't want to do diversion on how you manage a post-accident case. So that in the most recent catastrophic event in Europe with the mid-air, the governments of the nations involved, in one case, chose to do criminalization of the event. We may or may not agree that they should have done that, but they did. What was important internationally was the cause of the event and how that can be shared, in which case a human overrode a technical capability that had the airplane separated. Remember the purpose of air traffic control, and I'm repeating it out of intent, not senility. It is to keep airplanes from hitting each other. So when you look at the safety case, I think ICAO does a spectacular job in setting that base level. But there are many pieces above that base level in interface, in technology, in command and control that nations all over the world need to do to handle volume. If I would share the example in this case, if you drive a short distance to Manassas Tower, you will see them operating a different methodology than if you drive 5 miles over to Dulles International. That the volume and the complexity of the safety case does change either in country for the size and complications of the airport or within the sovereign methods that you use. And ICAO does allow that. ICAO does allow for that to be there. CSAR and NextGen are duplicative in some ways. Their approaches are completely different. That's why they're going to be duplicative. The Europeans are very much planning to lots of detail before implementation. They spent a lot of money and time getting a planned approach, and they're starting to implement that now, and it's a good approach. The United States is a different culture. It doesn't have 36 members of Eurocontrol to deal with. It's a homogeneous system. And in the homogeneous system, they're approaching it differently. So what the US has done is to put different pieces of the technology in place and then put an integrated wrapper on top. So they actually implement pieces quicker than the Europeans. Both work for their cultures. The key to it is, does the technology connect? Again, repetition by intent. The only place the technology all comes together is in the airplane. That's your Rosetta Stone for CSAR and NextGen. Their approaches will be different, and because the times are non-synchronous, they will be approaching it differently, and there will be some duplication and overlap. The fundamental technologies are the same. And the technologies have to talk to the airplane, and the airplane has to move between these systems. You want to leverage the sophistication of the airplane and start to move out of a purely ground-based command and control.
Okay, another question from the audience, because actually this is relevant to what Neil just talked about. As NextGen moves forward, could you address an issue that relates to Stephen Angus's statement that we need part of the focus to be on the human-machine system interface? It's been briefed that in USA Today, less than 10% of the air traffic controllers are pilots. Thus, less than 10% have first-hand knowledge of the challenges that a pilot faces in the cockpit. Do you see this as an issue? And if so, how would we address it? Steve, you started this.
Looks like I'm setting myself up, haven't I, Hank? It's a good question. My experience of the traditional air traffic controller was they came out of a flying experience, and particularly in Australia, using that as an example, I'm surprised at how many people here have a flying background. You go into similar environments in Australia where clearly it's not as large, but it's interesting to find people actually come from different and diverse backgrounds and not necessarily flying. It does come to the issue of security. I think it's critically important that the two main players in that day-to-day management, which is the controller and the pilot, do understand the roles, the workload issues at particular phases of flight that both experience. And therefore the challenge of being able to put controllers in the pointy end of an aeroplane and then for companies to release pilots to come and sit in and listen in when a controller's doing their work is a great challenge. But that is the human interface. And so therefore the question is very solid and has a lot of premise that the more you understand the other person's role, you understand when to talk, when not to talk at a most tactical level, but also you appreciate what is actually going on in the other professions. So my view is it is just starting to loosen up in Australia where it's possible to go and sit in the cockpit. I had that opportunity going to New Zealand a couple of weeks ago, which was fantastic. It's a long time since I've done that. But to me, that is a critically important ingredient in the culture.
Yeah. And we're working on that in the United States as well. After 9/11, that got rather locked down, but Bobby's working on that very hard to make that happen here shortly. Any other people? Yes, Eric, please.
I fully support what has been said. And in fact, if you look at the way safety assessment is going to be done on CESAR, actually, it follows a bit that approach because CESAR is like NextGen is a major program, looks quite complex, and at the end of the day, a safety case will have to be prepared. But it's not possible to do it only just top down. You have to do it bottom up. And in each of the various work packages that will be that are being set up, we will have teams of people from airlines, from air traffic control organizations, from airports, but I think we should include the airports as well, of course. And they were complementary. I don't think it's necessary for an air traffic control necessarily to have flying experience, as long as he understands the needs of its stakeholders. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to add that.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, David.
Yeah, just add a little bit. I agree, a controller does not need to be a pilot, and a pilot doesn't need to do air traffic control, but I think what is so vitally important is that we involve every stakeholder into the equation. Pilots have a perspective that controllers do not, and vice versa. And it's amazing how many times you get all the parties together, focus on a common problem with their different perspectives, and we walk away with solid solutions. And I think that's the important thing. I agree, the familiarization rides up in the flight deck is very valuable for controllers, especially they understand, I think, just how complex arrival and departures are. But I think more important than anything else is really getting all the stakeholders involved.
Okay. All right, and by the way, we do have roving microphones, so if anyone would like to ask a direct question, please raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you. Okay, we have one over here in about the third or fourth row. Keep your hand up, please, so we can get a microphone to you.
Can I ask? Okay, thank you. I think the debate or the discussion is very fruitful. It is very nice. My name's James Lubanga. I am from Kenya. And normally in Africa, we tend to hope with technology. We take the newest on the market because when we change our equipment, we go for the newest. But my concern is the way we are using terminology sees us next gen. And my understanding is that when ICAO came up with the FANS 1, the committee, which developed the concept for CNS ATM, and I think a roadmap for ATN implementation, we appear to be moving away from it. We appear to be doing our own things. I do agree that there are minimum standards to meet, and I do agree that there are some regions where the traffic is too complex and you need to put a standard higher for some of the specifications. But I've been thinking all along that when we talk of Caesars, we talk of next gen. We are actually talking of ATN. I don't know, maybe you want to correct me here, because my thinking is that we are moving the same direction towards ATN, towards a seamless sky or seamless operation. I don't know if you may correct me, but the way it's coming out is like each region is developing their own standards. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you and welcome. Anyone want to try to tackle that, Dave?
Yeah, I'll start.
Okay, all right.
I think the FANS one, well, the whole FANS committee and the whole concept and the PET trials that resulted in the FANS 1 and the FANS A package was a very valuable step forward. I think it's an interim step. I think it was a step that was really focused more on oceanic operations than anything else. And there's been some tremendous benefit in the oceanic arena, and I see FANS still going forward quite strongly in that airspace, in oceanic and remote. And I think there's a place for in Africa as well, if the equipage is there. But as we go forward into the next generation, and we start trying to take this type of capability into busy domestic arenas, I think we have to go into a different review, shall we say, review process and going forward. PBN, I think, is a good example of how we have gone forward, where we have taken one element of CNS, performance-based navigation, my apologies.
They're not all air traffic control out here, Dave.
Where we've taken one element, navigation. I mean, we already have aircraft. I know Neil has said time and time again, we got very capable aircraft. They're the common denominator, but it's the way that they're being managed. It's not common. We have finally taken one element, navigation, and have made a standardized, structured, global means of navigation that I see will answer every airspace requirement in the world today, whether it's the most busiest to the most remote. And so I think FANS, there's still a lot of useful life left, but still it is part of that evolutionary process.
Okay,
So yeah, I think I heard the question a little differently, and I think I understand it. So let me try a different approach. The European SESAR program may have more application conceptually, not technologically, conceptually, to Africa than the U.S. approach, because the Europeans are having to deal with a very large number of nations trying to act in a single European sky. And they have been unsuccessful to break down the sovereignty issues. So they are now trying to have virtual use of the airspace. You saw, if you've been following it, they recently came out with an agreement on functional airspace blocks, which are really an attempt to virtually overlap state boundaries. So Kenya, which is one of the leaders in change in sub-Saharan Africa in air traffic control and in aviation in general, when you look at that, when you look at your national boundaries, you would like to have that same type of homogeneity that the US has, but politically, you're unable to do that. So if I would make a recommendation, I would watch closely how functional airspace blocks worked and how successful SESAR was in the concept of crossing over national boundaries for the use of air traffic only, not defense, because that's the inhibitor for all those nations, and also for our friends in Kenya. So I think, though, that when your political climate allows you to start discussions on functional airspace blocks or whatever you choose as your means of virtual homogeneity, then you'll be successful at that. I would tell you from a governmental standpoint and from a security standpoint, the United States would love for you to be able to do that. In my workings in a previous life, I worked for the U.S. Department of Defense, and that was a big key issue in our use of routes over Africa, and you are aware more than anyone else is. We've had some very bad accidents because we haven't been able to fix that. So I would encourage you to try to approach it in that similar concept. Technologically, the U.S. and CISAR, they'll have different manufacturers, but they'll all be technologically capable of interfacing. So your concept on airspace, Africa is a tough problem, and you know it better than I do. Air traffic control in Africa is something that needs to be improved with some pockets of excellence, and I would throw your nation in as one of them. But it's a tough problem in Africa, and it's probably a panel unto itself for the safety case down there. And I think that's more what I heard you asking.
Okay, any other questions from the audience? I see one right here, sir.
Son, the next question, I like what Boeing is doing on the air traffic management system, and I would like to ask a question on that. If we place everything on the airplane, I think that is the best way to approach the problem because it is something that everybody is practicing. We had the question about air traffic control and pilots. I think when it comes to designing and making new plans, I think that individuals who are both air traffic controllers and pilots can make those decisions better. I was an air traffic controller way back and then an airline pilot, and I found that the communications, and I like the point that you made that if we don't understand the problem, we say automatically it's unsafe. We always use the unsafety issue. I remember way back when we were trying to put more airplanes in the air, and the sacred cow was, no, we have to have 2,000 feet separation above 29, and that is etched in stone. And now here I ended up training pilots back in Europe, in Paris, a number of years ago on reduced separation. So we're making progress, but the thing that we really need to focus on, and that's what I like about the Boeing's position, is how do we go now with the ADSB, the RNP? We have some wonderful people here in the audience. We have a gentleman from Seattle area that is involved in the RNP. How do we move this with your system of using the airplane as the centerpiece and make all the changes throughout the whole globe so that we can move and unify the whole system?
So I feel obligated to at least answer part of that. I may have miscommunicated. If people believe I said put everything on the airplane, then I didn't quite get it right.
No, I didn't mean it that way.
The crew in the air using the airborne platform, the airframe, and the crew on the ground using the ground-based systems are partners. There is I think you want a multi-tiered approach for safety. Airplanes don't need someone on the ground to fly. They do need assistance to ensure that safety is just like you need fire trucks at airports. It is a balanced approach. I do believe that things like RNP GLS have tremendous advantages on increasing capacity and safety. We know that. The regulators are working to figure out how to alter what is some dinosaur theories that are very tough to get out of our heads, my own included, to try to understand what the new system brings. So let me see if I can clarify this. There is technologies on modern aircraft built by a number of companies that should be leveraged for safety, efficiency, and capacity, and environmental issues as well. The air traffic system has become one of the biggest emission causers, not only the airplane. So that when you look at, for instance, flight time between Chicago and New York, which I believe, Hank, is the busiest air route in the world in volume, and you look at the time when it flew on DC-3s at 200 knots, and today when it's flown by capable airplanes pushing 600 miles per hour, the distance between those 2 points has actually increased. That's not true. The time between those distances has increased. Cities are actually in the same place. So you have to start to realize that whatever processes we're using, we have created a system that allows the time to separate airplanes, increase volume, and delays are necessary in the antiquated, anachronistic system in order to ensure safety. Airplanes are good leverage. The regulators have to help work with the air traffic people to start to reduce the time between those points. And there's 1,000 things that have to happen, each giving you little incremental changes. GLS, RMP, ADSB in, ADSB out, Datacom, all give you little pieces of it. But you have to do a gap analysis to find out how to put them together, where they come together, and constantly upgrade the technology in the safety case. Not all on the airplane. That's not what I meant to say.
I think what you said, which is very interesting, is that air traffic control, as we know it, should change to air traffic management and air traffic monitoring so that it is a true partnership.
Yeah, I would explain it to you that it's a rheostat that goes up and down. That there are times when air traffic control will be absolutely necessary as both to prevent accidents and maybe even to be reactive in the event they see something. And a large portion of it is flow and 4D trajectories and self-separation where appropriate between aircraft. It's not binary, folks. It is a very complex, nuanced system. And in order to ensure safety, it has to be approached understanding both the complexity and the nuances and constantly making changes. Throwing out ADSB in and out doesn't change anything. How are you going to use it? How are you going to ensure safety? What's the appropriate self-separation? And how do I handle the Convair 880 that's out there with the Boeing 787? Because they will have different capabilities. All of that has to be taken into account. Not easy, but very doable. Very doable.
Convair 880, you're really aging yourself here, Neil.
The reason I use that, because unless somebody here, Tony Broderick's here so he can correct me, that was the fastest, other than the supersonic aircraft that Airbus and BA built, but the Convair 80 was the largest, it was the fastest of the commercial airliners when it came out. I think it was pretty fast equipment, but the version that's unnecessary.
Okay, go to the Smithsonian, you'll learn all about it.
They're still flying.
Are they really? Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Steve. I'm sorry.
I'd like to pick up on my understanding, and maybe I misheard you, was that really the best solution here is to have an air traffic controller that's a pilot and vice versa. Is that what you were saying?
Well, basically I was saying that as a controller before, you know, we got into radar vectoring and all that sort of thing, and I see what is to come is that the air traffic control will act more like a monitoring system, using the newer system along with the cockpit information, so that basically what we're going to have is a big change in the way we do business, that the controllers really monitor and see the whole picture, which means that they can handle considerably more traffic, because now they're looking for conflicts instead of constantly being involved in monitoring. One of the big problems in air traffic control, as a controller, when you're busy with one airplane, your attention is diverted to that, and other things can happen on the radar scope. So this was my point, and I think that Boeing really answered it well, that this is a joint system that moves up and down. We're not changing we're not eliminating air traffic control. We're moving more to monitoring as being involved in vectoring airplanes. That was my point.
Or air traffic control by exception. Air traffic monitoring, air traffic management, air traffic control by exception. You do want that third-tier safety net that says something isn't right, I need to fix it. And you need a human, in that case, in the loop, not on the loop.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, gentlemen, we're between these folks and lunch, so I think it's time to bid adieu. I want to thank Akshish, Eric, David, Steve, and Neil for a really great panel. If we could give them a hand, please. Thank you. And of course, they'll all be available to engage with you during the lunch hour period. We want to thank Airbus, who's sponsoring the lunch today, which will be across the hall. So go ahead and make your way across the hall and thank Airbus when you see them. Thank you, everyone.